around this time last year, actually, Laura Beveridge, I was in Finsbury Park with some friends of mine watching the Wolfe Tones perform to 50,000 people. The Wolfe Tones in the 70s and 80s were banned from Irish radio for alleged support for terrorist organisations. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the IRA is still a proscribed terrorist organisation in the UK, as it should be. One of their songs has a chorus where the singer says, ooh, ah, up the ra. The alleged phrase that Mo Chara said on stage in November was up these organizations as well. So there's a similar vein of speech there. 50,000 people, I wasn't, but the other 49,999 people in the field in Finsbury Park were chanting, ooh, ah, up the ra. As I said, I wasn't. I can't vouch for anyone else, but it certainly looked like everyone else was doing it. How come none of those people were charged with terrorism offences? How come the 3 elderly men on stage were not charged with terrorism offences for encouraging a much larger crowd, by the way, than Kentish Town Forum to sing support for a proscribed terrorist organisation? Is it unfair or conspiratorial to start asking why Kneecap? I mean, we've been asking why Kneecap since May, right? But I just find it interesting that there is something so obviously, certainly in the Republic of Ireland, that particular song, Celtic Symphony, has been a rod to beat the Wolfe Tones with and a rod to beat working class communities with, because it's something that people from working class communities like to sing. I like to sing it. Everyone likes to sing it. But it's not being treated in the same, or it certainly wasn't at the time. And it was also the day after the election. The first day of Keir Starmer's tenure, 50,000 people were singing support for the IRA in Finsbury Park. I wonder if maybe that would have been a good way for him to start his premiership, to arrest 50,000 Irish people in London for support of a terrorist organisation.
You're going to be on a list with the concerts you're attending.
If I wasn't already. But no, I just find it interesting that, like, because it's also, I can't remember if it was one of the lawyers that mentioned Kneecap are not the first Irish band to be persecuted in the United Kingdom. They're not the first musical act. People like Christy Moore in the 1970s and 1980s were kind of hassled, arrested, detained on their way in and out of the UK because of the songs that they play. Same with the Wolfe Tones. Kneecap are the latest in a long string of it. I guess the difference here is that Kneecap, although their music is nodding and winking to a Republican tradition, well, maybe more than a nod and a wink, I suppose, but their activism is by far and away what I think it's fair to say most people know them for. Their pro-Palestine activism, certainly since Coachella. I mean, they only had a couple of 100,000 followers before Coachella. Now they're approaching 1 million on Instagram and probably more than that on Twitter. Yeah, just thinking out loud.
I think you're right about the context of these charges are incredibly important and we were speaking earlier about like how the meaning changes based on like the audience you're performing to or the time in which you're performing a certain song. And I mean, that's what his lawyer is saying in the statement, that this was a rush prosecution following the Coachella performance where Kneecap did not shy away from speaking truth to power. But I kind of yesterday was thinking about like who we call a terrorist, why we call them a terrorist, and like where the word terrorism comes from. And it comes from
excuse me.
No worries. It comes from the French Reign of Terror, which was when the monarchist state was killing Republican individuals. And I think it was really interesting that like originally terrorism was used to refer to state abuses of power and to state uses of violence. But then,
against Republicans.
Never. But then I think when we see the first introduction of anti-terrorism laws, that's post-World War I. And by this time now, the state is applying it to individuals, but specifically it's applying it to individuals in British colonies and French colonies. They are now the terrorists, and they're using it as a way of criminalising and delegitimizing anti-colonial violence and struggle in occupied parts of the world. I think there's an irony today that we're seeing anti-terrorism laws being used against someone who has been very vocal in speaking out against a settled territory, against settler colonialism, essentially. But also that we no longer view the state as a terrorist actor when Israel itself is committing like a reign of terror, essentially. But we don't view the state as a terrorist actor. And we don't view British ministers as facilitating that reign of terror when they're supplying F-35 parts, when they're striking up deals, and they're not being charged with terrorism, but Mo Chara from Kneecap is. It just reminded me of there's this professor. He's like a legal scholar. He's kind of one of the forefronts of critical terrorism studies and like how the law applies to terrorism. And he said that the value of the definition of terrorism is that it has no definition. It's a malleable concept that can be deployed by the hands of power. And I thought that was very fitting for kind of summing up the way that I've been thinking about who is charged as a terrorist and who isn't.
Well, that's precisely it, isn't it? I think where I'd slightly push back is when you say that we don't recognize Israel or the states facilitating Israel's campaign in Gaza as terrorists. Because I think it's true to say to an extent, I think when it comes to the media and political apparatus, they don't regard Israel and those states as that. But I mean, speaking to people yesterday, there was not a single person that didn't put out that line that there's more than a line. I think it's recognized wisdom at this point that, especially when it came to last week and the revelations that the UK is actually training IDF soldiers in the UK. Whether they're going on to commit war crimes in Gaza is a different story, but they're part of the apparatus that is doing so. The UK is putting parts of F-35 fighter jets into a pot over there that they can't see who's taking anything from. And Israel are taking from that pot. The UK is complicit in Israel's war crimes. Most of the states in the world are complicit by allowing them to continue acting in the way that they're acting. And the public are very aware of that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that there's like this common sense amongst people who have eyes and can see for themselves that it is a terrorist state and they are using methods of terror. But it is interesting, this asymmetry of power between the general public and the legal political framework that actually has the power to label people as terrorists and to enact consequences for those labels.